Kick off in our traditional way by reciting the karakia. It's up on the screen. Manawa mai te Māori nuku, manawa mai te Māori rangi. He manawa nui, he manawa tahi, he manawa ora e, ka whakamaua kia te hina, hui e tai ki e. I thought I would, just before we get underway, acknowledge the fact that we're missing one of our members. Well, actually, we're missing two. Claire Johnson has given her apologies, but obviously the seat where Councillor Adrian Staples usually sits is vacant because she passed away last week, and that's incredibly sad for all of us, and I just wanted to acknowledge that before we got underway. And it's a little bit weird for us being back in this space without her here. We do have a whakawātia next week ahead of our council meeting, just to give us all some resolution and move on as a unit. But the admin staff also just wanted to mention that there is a memorial book in reception if anyone wants to leave a comment as a way of remembering her and helping grieve. So that's there for everyone, and it's nice to have Adrian's seat unoccupied at the moment, but obviously at some stage someone will have to sit there, but not today. So right, just moving on to the order of business. We've first got apologies, and as mentioned, Councillor Johnson is not here. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Saw and Councillor Free. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Right, moving on to conflicts of interest. Does anyone have any conflicts of interest they would like to declare? There being none, we will move on to public participation. So Wendy Q is here joining us again. So Wendy, would you like to come up? You are now a bit of a regular, Wendy, so you know the deal. But the speaker has 5 minutes to speak, and then there's 5 minutes for questions, and a bell will ding at 4 minutes, and then again at 5 minutes to let you know. Take it away.
Kia ora, Koto. I just want to talk about fares. During this cost of living crisis, some people can kind of think in various ways of what the fare is. And often the thinking in this doom scrolling age is that prices can only go up, 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 up. So what the choices are? Is it extra large, or is it extra small, or is it medium price up? So are we limited to this? And also, before I address other things, I just want to kind of address the elephant in the room. This being the fare caps, what Auckland Transport already has done for $50 for a week. I'm not sure what it is, but maybe we can just talk about this after that, what's going on there. But what I wanted to highlight is that the comedy perception on the left doesn't really match what the science would be on the right. The comedy expectation, like this is like a meme that has been going around the comedies, that there's always an excuse. Whether it's a COVID, whether it's an inflation, or whether it's the iron or whatever comes through the tweet. But we usually do like a price testing on a volume basis that, hey, what if we have less price, like a less fare? Like if you're paying less, maybe there could be more revenue because more people actually use the public transport. And I would say that was very evident when the diesel prices went up. People chose public transport, and there was rocketing growth in the public transport. What if the price is less? Could this be an option? And what we usually do is we do extensive A/B testing around live production things, and we find out that, hey, how does this affect the volume? And we actually get real data around, what will happen from revenue-wise, and do we get more people actually using the thing? So I don't, as a member of public, I don't really see this happening, but it might be helpful. And also, let's think about because I know there's a private share from the central government that is tied into these revenues. But there's also a provision for advertising revenue. And from this, like, do we always need to look at internal cost savings or internal fare rises? Could we just leverage what we have, like film industry or game industry in Wellington? So these external things. So yeah, we're in Wellington. So let's think like Wellingtonians. Like it doesn't mean like some clicky naming convention where people come with some silly ideas about bus names, but it could be, who knows. But we should leverage the time that people spend in buses, often 15 minutes to an hour. That's a huge amount of time. And there is like, that could be connection between the council and the people, or the people between people. It could be like, instead of just people watching on the room upside down, it's like, what do we do with that time? There's lots of game developers who are really struggling in Wellington to get their ideas out. And meanwhile, people think that, hey, they're just like starving us, but that's not the case. They just don't have marketing channel. Oh yes, I got a minute. And also 48 hours, like a film competition, that there's like a film industry that came around because people just want to get stuff done. And it was like there was a competition to actually get their work featured out. And also, like, there's like all these games that could be leveraged with the geolocation buses. The bus geolocation can be an element for this kind of presentation media, virtual media in the bus, and that could be combined with the QR codes in the bus earlier. So what do we do with this time? Like, do we have to have people doom scrolling the bus, or do we give them something to do? This can also maybe address some of the safety issues as well, because when people are bored, they don't cause trouble. So yeah, thank you.
Excellent, thank you for that, Wendy. Who has any questions for Wendy? Okay, there being none, thank you so much for your presentation. We really appreciate it once again, and hope to see you back at a future meeting.
Thanks.
Okay, right, moving on to the next items on the agenda, we have the confirmation of the public minutes of the meeting from Thursday the 19th of March. Does anyone have any comments or corrections to those minutes that they'd like to raise? No, excellent. Moved by Councillor Gaylor, seconded by Councillor Duffy. All those in favour? Carried. Excellent. Okay. Moving on to the first substantive item, the update on progress actions. I'll just hand over to Sam to take us through these. There aren't very many.
Kia ora, councillors. So there are two actions on the action list, and both of them are noted as completed. So the matter about bus communications is a thing that we're looking at the moment and always keeping our eyes on. The cycles matter is the next item is an item on this agenda, and the rail replacement services action plan is also on this agenda for the meeting today.
Does anyone have any comments on that? Yes, Councillor Saul.
On the item or on that particular topic?
On the action items update.
Just wanted to query when we had free fares and during public participation last time, there was a request from myself to ask whether we could investigate whether we should be joining other councils on that free fares, and I just note that that wasn't on there.
I'm told that was at a council meeting, not a public transport. But nonetheless, this is probably a good place to have that resolved.
That's why we have DEM Services.
So yes, I'll talk with DEM Services about where we can put that action item. Any further comments? I have one. So I guess just in relation to that integrated bus communications, I feel like the conversation was more around the fact that we at one stage had planned more, a substantive project around a communications hub, and we'd had to pull back through lack of funding. But I guess there was a concern from councillors that we didn't quite not fair to say we didn't understand the impacts of that, but it would be useful to have better understanding of the impacts of that and whether that is something that we want to incorporate into a future long-term plan discussion. So I feel like potentially that comment doesn't quite cover the information that we would need in relation to that item. So if it's all right, can we keep that there and just look to bring back? It obviously doesn't need to be immediate, but just remind us about what that project was and what the benefits of that project were going to be
in terms of the work operations.
Yeah. Is everyone comfortable with that, Councillor Free?
Yeah, I'm just looking at I am. Can I bring up a slightly different one? So just looking at the Rail Replacement Services Action Plan Update report. I'm just wondering if my understanding was this was also going to be about how to make it clearer to customers where the bus replacements actually were and things about making that service work better. But I'm looking at that here, and it doesn't seem to capture that as fully as I think it might have.
So I just hold that question, I guess, for like 1 minute, because that's the first substantive item on our agenda. So there'll be lots more opportunity to talk about that. Does anyone have any other action issues in relation to the actions? No. Okay. We will. Obviously, we've got the bikes on trains and the BRT as substantive items, so they will both be addressed at this meeting. But if we could keep that that communications hub action item open, that would be good. Okay, so moving on to our first substantive item, which is indeed the rail replacement services, and we have Paul and Tamsin coming up to the hot seat to speak to us about this.
Morning, councillors. So the BRT, this paper provides an update on Metlink's BRT action plan and seeks endorsement of the proposed 2026-27 programme of work. The report outlines progress made over 25-26 and highlights what we've learned from sort of customer feedback or councillor feedback and delivery to date, and presents a revised customer focused action plan for 26 and 27. Proposed actions continue to focus on improving customer information, infrastructure, rail replacement stops, and the operating model for bus replacements, with the aim of delivering more reliable, understandable and accessible services when trains are not able to run. The committee is asked to note progress to date and endorse the 26-27 Rail Replacement Services Improvement Action Plan.
That was short and sweet. So who has questions for Paul and Tamsin? Do you want to re-ask your questions, Sarah?
What actions can be taken to make it clearer to people where the stops are, where a BRT bus is likely to turn up? Because it can be anywhere, can't it? Unfortunately for us, and people have to organise this.
Well, what we've got comms working on at the moment is an educational pack, and we've got that advice from this committee on that we can make sure that that customers fully understand how BRT operates, because it does operate different to a train. There will be queuing systems. Where BRT stops are, what they have to do in terms of payment. The Wadded Upper line, for example, you're paying on station, whereas on every other line you're actually paying on the bus. So we just want to try and give customers a clearer understanding of how BRT works, and that even with how buses arrive, we've only got space for 3 buses to load at any one time on platform 10. It doesn't mean that the first bus might arrive on time, and then the second one follows that, and then the third after that. So that might be the full service for that time period, but it doesn't mean that your bus is left, there will be one right behind it. We just have, so that everyone understands what's actually happening and what they're seeing.
So I've got questions from Councillor James and Councillor Saw. Councillor James?
Just speaking of platform 10, just diving into para 29, where KeyRail is seeking a lease commitment from us before we can make any improvements there. Can you just talk a bit more about that? Give us some more details. Is that usual that they seek these sort of things from like our comrades in Auckland, for example?
I think there's a part of KiwiRail that is very focused on revenue for their for their assets, and property is part of that. We've got the budget to do the actual infrastructure improvements, but the lease itself, so the ongoing OPEX, we don't have the budget for. But there's some things in the lease that puts all the risk on us and this council that we couldn't wear. If and one of those being if we can do all the infrastructure work and then be moved within 6 months to a place of their choosing.
You mentioned in that paragraph 29 that we have no budget for the lease. What kind of figures are we looking at? Like, it seems completely unacceptable to me that KiwiRail would want any more than a peppercorn rental, given we have to provide BRT because they have failed to maintain the tracks to a decent standard over the past 50 years. But I assume by that comment that we have no budget for the lease, they're looking for more than a peppercorn rental for that area.
I think just in relation to this whole piece around KiwiRail and how they're dealing with their property assets, they have they've made a change in the way that they're dealing with that. So we are working through what the implications of that might be for us, and certainly with a view to we need to make this system work, and probably a market rent is not what we'd be seeking to be levied with.
I understand Councillor Ponta has an upcoming meeting with KiwiRail. With this, I feel deeply concerned about this comment, and that KiwiRail needs to be part of the solution. Was that something that you would be able to raise with them at your upcoming meeting?
It will be now.
Excellent. Okay, so do you want to just note that? Councillor Saw and then Councillor Ponta.
Thank you. Mine is quite similar to Councillor Free's question in terms of understanding what some of the signage and the wayfinding will be for public transport users. While I appreciate it has been in development that you have the little pink signs for indicating where people need to go, sometimes they're quite subtle and difficult to see if someone's there to get on the train and there's nothing there. So I'm just wondering what some of the criteria are to make it abundantly clear to users at other stops around our network, and also how temporarily pink can we make some of our BRT buses? You know, those are the sorts of things that we can look at in terms of, I know this is getting way too operational, but, you know, when you have buses that have school signage on them, is it also possible to look into something like that where it's really obvious that the wheels on the bus is actually a train?
From a Hanover perspective, or bus signage itself, we've tried to get, we're working with operators to make sure that the bus signage is more consistent, so they know, rail replacement, for example, doesn't help in terms of where's it going and what services it actually providing. So making sure that the bus signage is consistent, where it's got destination, and then whether it's express or all stops, so the customer has all the information they need. I suppose we've still got to do work in terms of what we are putting on stations, so and not just Wellington, but sort of all stops, so that everyone knows exactly where it is. Tams and team have been doing a really good job in terms of the timetabling and trying to get out on Cuba Street people to look at what we're changing and give feedback on is this readable to you? Do you understand what we're trying to do here? Are things easy to find? Because the website isn't always user friendly. So we're trying to do a little bit of user testing out on Cuba Street to make sure we get the right solution.
Second question, but I would like to just give some user feedback. I used BRT on Good Friday and other buses, and it was a seamless experience on the Johnsonville line. It was, thought we need some positive news. Yeah, it was incredibly smooth. It turned up on time, actually. Got similar crescent stop, so it worked. Also, I just wanted to add a question on paragraph 30 around BRT stops and the data tool. I think it would be helpful for councillors to understand, perhaps not influence or interfere, but to understand what the priority criteria is. Because it says here, enable data tools been created for all BRT stops across the network to be prioritised for improvement. We'd just like to understand how that's going to be prioritised in the assets and infrastructure program. Again, not for us to interfere, but just to understand what the criteria is, and also that we can go out to our community to manage their expectations.
So thank you, Councillor. We are working on bringing together, excuse me, more structured program of work around our implementation of accessibility at stations and stops and so on. And within that, the BRT stops are incorporated. So the intention would be that we put that framework together, and then it will come back to you to see what that implementation looks like. Where the significant hubs fall in the construction cycle, where some are done within our renewals program. I mean, looking to do efficient works, but prioritise appropriately, and make sure you have the information and communities have the information, so that they know when works are going to be done.
Thanks, and I'm just really appreciated attachment 2, which was the program of the work and some of that scope. So thank you for including that.
If I could just ask a follow-up question around the fully accessible hubs, can you please explain what that means in relation to BRT? So I get that for the network we have we've agreed to prioritise some fully accessible locations for people to catch trains or buses, but in relation to BRT, when 1 out of 5 buses, BRT replacement buses, is not itself accessible, why are we prioritising BRT accessible hubs?
These aren't. So my apologies that the heading on that page is slightly confusing. That's actually a sequence of work around the accessibility action plan, within which BRT stops are included. So these are about physical works in terms of curb heights and things like that. It's not about the fleet being accessible. This is about the on-ground infrastructure.
So I understand that, but if it's the BRT stop by necessity can't be at the same location as the train stop. It needs to be somewhere else, and you have a 20% chance of not getting a bus that is accessible if you're at that BRT stop. So why are we prioritising the BRT stop being accessible when you can't, if you have an accessibility need, you can't catch BRT because you might not get a bus that you can use?
I'm not totally sure where that stat comes from.
It comes from in the paper where we're seeing NCS buses being used 20% of the time that don't meet our accessibility needs, and the coaches on the Wairarapa line. So
yes, yep. Okay, you're right there. But the NCS buses, the 18 that we have, and okay, occasionally there's going to be times where something is subbed out, but all those 18 are accessible. They're also snapper enabled and they have bike racks, so they meet the standard. But there will be times where there is maintenance and something is subbed out, and that bus won't be accessible. But there'll be certainly the number will be way less than 20%. Okay.
And if I can just add a little bit of context to my answer, Councillor, the accessibility in terms of the physical infrastructure is about, yes, the right bus pulling up to the right point, but then it's about curb heights and pull-ins and things like that. And accessibility needs is not necessarily what we're trying to satisfy just at that level, but ease of access for all of our customers. It's the whole of the experience for all of our customer loading, but I hear what you're saying about specific accessibility needs, but the infrastructure that we plan is for accessibility in the biggest sense, the widest sense.
I've got questions from Councillor Ponta and Councillor Free.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Three questions, I think. So the NCS buses, why would it ever be appropriate now that any bus was on the network that wasn't accessible?
Well, I think just like the chair said, there was you are going to have the wadded upper buses that, yes, will have an accessible bus, but there's going to be a coach running alongside it. And we've done that so that customers are comfortable on that journey. The low rider isn't well used because people will use the coach. There shouldn't be, but there are going to be times. I think 1% of roughly 1% of services are unplanned, and that is a scramble for whatever bus is available because our metro fleet is busy fulfilling their contracts. So that the use of maybe Rambler or other services may not be accessible, but the NCS fleet is the NCS 18 buses that we've put Snapper on are accessible.
So I think the difficulty I'm having here is the same difficulty we had when we only had part of the fleet with bike racks on them. It just doesn't provide confidence to those people who want to use that service if it's a lottery every time a bus turns up as to whether it's going to meet your needs or not. Now, I appreciate the fact that it might be low, that the chance of losing in that lottery might be low at the moment, but nevertheless it's still there. And if you turn up with it in a wheelchair, or you've got some difficulty walking or whatever, that's going to be useless to you, eh?
I think this is also the point around getting to a point with KiwiRail where we can plan block of lines. So the longer lead time people have, you can now contract further out. Our operators, they love doing BRT services. They want to keep doing it. They'd love the extended time so that they can then start investing in better equipment.
So that does lead on to the second question, Madam Chair. The approach to the block of line. We're only talking about BRT because ultimately we either get a block of line or some emergency that means that the line is not open. One of the things that we've discussed around this table, perhaps on a more informal basis, is how long can we actually sustain blocks of line every second weekend? Feels like it may not be, but let's say every second weekend, as opposed to doing a substantive block of line and taking out the line for 2 or 3 weeks over the Christmas period. And where do those conversations start, and why is that not possible?
They have started, and they have been for a while. KiwiRail has just gone through a restructure of their metro division. Andy's more than willing to have this conversation. He just needs the right people. So they've had to go out and recruit, I think, 32 people. He needs those people and the right people in the right seats, because he wants to have this conversation with us, because he doesn't know how they're going to spend the money if we're not doing it differently than we are now. Okay,
so what do we need to do around this table as a council, at the governance table, to actually send that message to KiwiRail?
I think Councillor James and Connolly have a meeting set up with Andy.
Okay. Cool. So final question, sorry, come back to the lease. So we're talking about, are we just talking about the lease for Platform 10, or are we talking about the hairier issue of the lease for the entire railway station? Is it tied up with that, or is it just, do we just want to get that sliver
I think
sorted?
They were, when we started the conversation, they were happy to separate it, with at some point coming back to the other nine platforms. So they're happy to do a standalone lease on just Platform 10.
All right. My only observation, Madam Chair, is that KiwiRail have tried to have us over the barrel on this lease arrangement in the past. And the reason that New World Supermarket is no longer there is that they failed in the negotiations. So I think we need to play hardball.
Yeah, it feels pretty clumsy, and it also feels counterproductive from a public benefit perspective. Like, we're all in it to try to provide the best metro rail service we can, and by trying to fleece each other, we're not going to do that. So, we need to come up with some way to work through this. So you've got a meeting. Councillor James and I separately have a meeting, and we'll report back on that. Councillor Free.
Yeah, just on this previous conversation, I'm wondering when we get cabinet ministers involved, but that's for the people at a meeting to maybe assess. I wanted to go back to the bus stops for the BRT, and thank you for making the point. It's not just platform 10; it's many other little railway stations. So a friend said they'd had an experience walking the Skyline, the escarpment track, and missed the bus because it wasn't clear to them where they were meant to go to catch it, and it's half-hour wait. I just wonder if there's better signage that we can put on the bus stop that's maybe going to be used for BRT. And I wondered too if there's necessarily a conflict between that bus stop being used for regular trains, because presumably if the regular trains are not running, then the bus stop's available for the BRT. But can we do more to do some kind of really characteristic signage that says this is your potential BRT stop if needed, so that people who it's just a bit more in your face.
Yeah, I mean we have it on the website, but it's not everybody is going to be using a phone. Not everyone's going to know where to go and look for that. And maybe you're right, there is an opportunity at the train station to actually go, you are here, BRT, stop here.
Yeah,
So
I think at
people have got a
Waikanae
vision.
Station, it's really obvious where the buses actually wait, and I think there might even be a BRT sign there for where if it's going to be bus replaced, where you would wait for that. But I just think, so people who use that train station quite a bit would know, oh, if it's BRT, I've seen that bus stop, I know where I've got to go.
I think this definitely is an issue that we've identified, Sarah, that it depends which station you're talking about, but for some stations, the BRT stop needs to necessarily be some distance from the train station. So at Silverstream, it's a good 200 metres from the train station, and I know where the stop is, but if you turned up at the train station and didn't know, you'd be scrambling in sort of a 500 metre radius to try to find the stop, and it's not clear on the app or the website where to go. So this is definitely something that I understand will be addressed as part of that action plan. This is definitely something that's been identified. So just my comment on the action plan is to do with the dates that you've got. So you've got 2026 to early 2027, but your last column says October and beyond. I wondered, and I'm getting the feel from the rest of the committee, how would you feel if we truncated that action plan to the end of the year, and we put in an additional recommendation that said that you present a review of the plan in November, and at the same time as that, you provide details for the 2027 summer block of line, because that's the next big test of these actions that you're putting into place. So we want to see, before we head into next summer, that the action plan has been delivered and what you've managed to achieve between now and then, and also the provisions for next summer's block of line are sufficient to give us comfort.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is everyone comfortable with that as a way forward? So that is that recommendation that I have as number 3. So I will just let Democratic Services type that up. But are there any other questions before we move on? So also that would, number 2 would be reduced to just the 2026 BRT improvement plan, and we will wrap it up ahead of the summer block of line and then have an opportunity to reassess. One moment. I guess I also should mention that I've asked the team separate to have a look at communications, operational communications in general. So if a bus doesn't arrive or a train is late, like what is the process to get the communications out to people? Because at the moment it's a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes the communications are excellent, sometimes they're not timely, sometimes they're confusing, and I think we can do better in that space. That is separate project, but still intricately linked with it. BOL, block of line. You briefly got a view of those of that third recommendation, but essentially it was just so it currently reads the first two recommendations, except that number 2 is reduced to just the 2026 BRT improvement plan, and then there's the third recommendation as I suggested. Is everyone happy with that? I will move it in that case. Would someone like to second it? Councillor James. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Excellent. Okay, we will move on to the equally exciting topic of bikes on trains. And for this, I have Tamsin and Paula taking a seat, and we've got Emmett and Daniel.
Good morning, councillors. So for those who may not have met, this is Dan Powell, who's our Manager of Rail Operations, and we look forward to discussing this paper. So just a couple of introductory points. So thank you very much for all the feedback that we've received from councillors feeding into this paper. It's a challenging topic. And it does generate a lot of passenger interest. Essentially, it's a topic defined by physical constraints on the Matangi fleet at peak and trying to get a balance between carrying passengers safely and comfortably and also maximising the amount of bikes that we can actually carry in that peak period. So there is that tension that's there. We note in the report that while we do have restrictions for the carriage of cycle at peaks, bike carriage at peak in peak direction is still possible, just not on every service, and there are no bike restrictions in the counter peak direction. So somebody wants to take their bike from Wellington to Upper Hutt to go to the cycle trail first thing in the morning, no restrictions. So we do note in the report as well that we included some international benchmarking, and this concludes really that it's a global issue. It's a global issue that companies across the world are struggling with. International best practice, or international practice is not best practice, international practice tends to be broadly restrictive at those peak periods due to capacity constraints. Pre-booking is common in some jurisdictions, but it has its issues. And of course, paid carriage of bicycles is in force in a lot of those jurisdictions. So some of the things that we get from the international benchmarking, there's no easy international solution for our problem here. We do think there are improvements to comms and messaging that we could do for passengers with cycle at the moment, and just acknowledge some of the comments that came from Councillor Free in that regard. And we note that we are seeing growth in the peak of peak at rail services with standing room only on some morning services. So that's really the context that we're having this discussion in. So the options that we currently have for increasing cycle carriage at peak will all involve reducing passenger seating at peak and potentially cause disruption for accessibility passengers. So that is the sort of context again in that capacity period at peak. So we take the paper as read, look forward to the discussion and happy to answer any questions.
Excellent, thank you. So just to remind the committee, this had been a request from a previous committee meeting where I guess we had heard some public feedback about an inability to bring cycles on some services, and there was a feeling that that was it actually justified to have those restrictions. So the feeling from officers is that those restrictions are justified at the moment, and probably not wanting to change that setting too much at this time. But let's talk about it. Councillor Saw.
Thank you for this, Emmett, and for the analysis, and to keep us in the realms of reality. Don't get our expectations up too high. But on paragraph 45, I'm afraid you've got a slight glimmer of hope there, which says, the rail sector is internationally experimenting with flexible interior design, and says some of these improvements can only be introduced as existing rolling stock is phased out. Now, luckily, we are about to have some new rolling stock. So can you please, maybe you aren't the person, but I feel like we might be at the for once, our timing could be good. Can you speak to how your team are interfacing with our work on the tūhono trains, and how some of that flexible interior design might be explored there?
So through you, Chair, we did explicitly say that in this paper we really just focused on the Matangi. So I don't have any information about Tūhono.
I did ask if Barry Fryer could be here to
Barry
talk
is
through
in another workshop at the moment.
Yeah. Barry's unable to be here, but in terms of the Tūhono train, the way that the approach that's been taken to design of the it is to be as flexible as possible, and in particular in relation to the areas of the carriages that accommodate wheelchairs, pushchairs, cycles, so that there are folding seats which can make space for any of those things, as they're needed. So very much a providing the space in a flexible way, depending on how it might need to be used for any given service.
But also, we did have a chat. I had a chat with Sam and the team about this last night, and I do understand. I don't want to get people's expectations up too much. There are still limitations in regards to the tūhono trains, particularly because of our narrow gauge, and the fact that this does limit the amount of space that we have inside a carriage to do things, whether that's carry wheelchairs or bikes or prams or people. So I think at this stage, the design has allowance for maybe 1 or 2 extra bikes per kind of paired unit, but not a massive increase on where we're sitting at the moment. So if there's a direction from the councillors to relook at that, I can definitely feed that back to the team, but we are limited by the space that we have.
I guess the other thing is that if I'm looking optimistically to the future, when we have paths like Tupua Horonuku and Te Aratūpua opening, I think we might be in a situation where there will be more demand for space on our carriages. So I guess we are going to need a demand two things, right? We're going to have some room, physically on our trains, but also some process of demand management. And I know you've outlined some of those potential options that we have. I guess want to really emphasize that those two things are going to create that situation in our public transport network and create demand probably at different times than we expect in terms of commuter times. How has that been factored into some of that thinking for the future, as opposed to the issue that is now?
So through you, Chair, I'll just make one comment before I hand over to Dan. But one comment I would say is that we did a little bit of looking at that booking system and how we could sort of make a little bit of progress in that and understand it better. The only options really that came to us, an electronic option, would have to be somehow integrated into NTS, so we're having to look at that. And I don't think that's in their scope of works at the moment, so that wasn't an avenue we could go down. And having a parallel system to our fare system would just be very, very complex. We did look at what would be involved in a sort of manual booking system, and that again, resource intensive, staff dependent, potentially inconsistent. So a lot of the booking system things we looked at, it's probably just not the right time as well until NTS bends in to have an electronic exploration. So Dan, is
So
there...
yeah, at the moment with the new cycleway that's coming on, we have been working with the cycleway project team and looking at ways that we can increase capacity maybe over the weekend. On our off-peak services, the train managers do have some discretion. So on a 2-car unit, you could fit, depending on availability of space, you can fit up to 9 bikes on at any time, and that can be utilised mainly in off-peak. It's rarely utilised in peak services. But it's the constant monitoring and making sure that we are over those events. So I think the cycleway is due to open on the 16th of May, and we're hopefully putting something together for that opening day, just to allow it to make sure that we've got enough capacity on those services. The Wairarapa trains, we put an extra van on over the weekend that gives us room for an extra 20 bikes, and that was done in conjunction with the bike trail going over the hill. So there are various options and things that we can look out for, and we do. But like Emmett said, for a proper booking system, I think that's kind of in the future.
Even just certainty, right? If these services have capacity, like extra capacity, you've got 3 trains a day that only do that, but then I guess that has impacts on number of workers needed to do all that too.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to point out is, I think someone mentioned it before, there is limited capacity. There is an upper limit, even with the extra van that's on the Wairarapa line. Once you get over that limit for safety purposes, you just can't take any more bikes on at that stage.
And just through you, Chair, another point that needs to be made in that regard, it's actually how people bring the bikes in and out of the train. In the current configuration, you can simply wheel your bike in, slot it in there, and that causes minimal disruption if there's other people standing. Some of the options that we've looked at include those vertical storage, for example, and they cause potential major health and safety issues because you have to swing a bike around to get it vertical, and of course that would make a need for passengers to stand back. You get started tension, you get disruption, and potentially, people brushing clothes against bike wheels, etc., etc. It just becomes challenging.
Not that great now when you've got more than 2 bikes though, either. So it's not just the vertical one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a speaking order. I've got Councillor Duthie, Free, Ponta and Gaylor. So Councillor Duthie.
Thank you. Suggest an action from Councillor Saw's first question, if councillors could get a briefing on the current design for the 2 Honor trains, because I presume it's going through detailed design and needing to be locked down pretty soon. It'd be quite good to be familiar with what we're looking at and how we've balanced the trade-offs.
I think
So
that's
with
an
your
excellent
permission,
idea.
Chair,
Is that possible?
Receive that. My question is, as well as this topic coming up, this triennium with public participation, we also discussed it back around Riverlink and the mitigation, because the Melling line is one that does carry bikes at peak, and the closure of Melling station impacted people who otherwise were using that from there. And at the time, the advice was that we had looked across the patronage of Hutt Valley Line peak services and had identified some that had capacity for enough capacity to be able to carry bikes. But we paused that work while we were looking at budget rationalisation and whatever was going on. And now we've got the situation where patronage is starting to increase, so it's changing that picture. But what did we find back then? How many of those big services did we find back then that could have potentially enabled bike passage?
I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but as you said, that was back in July or August last year, and a lot's changed. What we did find, and I mentioned this the other day, is that there are a lot of services that had spare capacity on a Monday, Friday, maybe Tuesday, but not on the busiest day of the week. And an example of that is our busiest service on the Hutt line. Just looking through some of those variances, you could have 500 people more on the Wednesday train as you would on the Friday, which is a huge difference and does look like the train might be emptier on those days. So Going back to what we found last time, there were a number of services. And when I say a number, 1 or 2 services that we thought could be perhaps looked at across the 5 days where there'd be the spare capacity, but I don't have the specific services to hand.
But it doesn't sound like that situation applies today.
No, we're definitely in a different situation than we were in August last year.
Notwithstanding the rising patronage situation now, we will still have that pattern where there's a lot higher patronage midweek than Monday, Friday. What's your analysis of the potential for Mondays and Fridays to be cycle enabled on certain peak services in the middle? Admitting that it's complicated and there's a trade-off between administration and complication versus what's your thoughts?
Complication. So through you, Chair, to be honest, Councillor, the peak period, and of course the peak period is where we sort of live and die in a lot of ways in public perception. And one of the things that, you know, the team, everybody is struggling at the moment is predicting the patronage, and you simply, it is very, very difficult at the moment. If we were to shift things on a Monday and a Friday and then start seeing spikes, what we create is potentially situations for conflict. I think personally, it is about the comms, it is about the certainty, it is about saying to people, when is bike carriage possible in peak direction in the morning? Be very, very clear about that. Maybe having just better information about, you know, where you should bring your bike in, all those sort of sequencing messages. But I think trying to have a different system on a Monday and a Friday invites conflict with passengers. And a point I would make is that, and we didn't really go on about this too much in the report, but the whole idea of staff discretion. Now, some of the feedback we have had through staff channels, through unions, is their feeling that when discretion, particularly at peak periods, is available to them, what it often causes is inconsistent decisions, for a start, and that creates a lot of passenger dissatisfaction. But also opportunities for conflict, where, for example, if they've let bike in earlier on a journey, but then have to have that bike vacating a place because a wheelchair needs to come in, the wheelchair gets priority, that creates a lot of. So staff have fed back to us that they prefer to have actually very clear and clearly communicated restrictions in place in those peak periods when you're likely to have, you know, multiple sort of needs, and then have that discretion more in those off-peak periods that Dan has talked about, you know, when there is plenty of scope for bringing extra bikes on, loading them in, but you're in an environment where people are not in that morning stress or that evening stress, and where you have those constraints, and particularly where there is an ability to bring a bicycle safely in and out of a train, you know, without passengers being in close proximity.
Yes.
I'm most familiar with the Hutt Valley line, and the paper points out that there is cycle exclusions aren't across every peak service. So from Upper Hutt, from Taita, from Waterloo, from Petone, you have some options. But are we aware that if you board at an intermediate station, and Nainai is one that comes to mind because it's a fair distance from Waterloo or Trentham or somewhere, or Taita, there are actually no services. So if you board with if you want to go bike and train from Nainai, there is no train which will take you between 6:44 a.m. and 9:01 a.m. and no train that will take you home between 4:17 and 6:11. And so an anecdotal example I had from a constituent is kids who have teenagers taken their bikes into Wellington for the day in the school holidays, and then they go to board a train home, and they, you know, at 4:30, and they have to wait for 2 hours for the next train to take them back to Nainai from Wellington. So that's where there's sort of, while the paper presents that there is some flexibility and you can choose your services, it's a bit patchy depending on where you're going to and from. So Any thoughts on that sort of situation, that there are some stations where you simply can't get a peak service at all?
Again, it's down to the capacity limits of those services, and because we've got the express and all stopping patterns, it does mean there are some stations that do miss out. And this is one of the things that we were discussing the other day, just about improving the communications to allow people to plan ahead. Going back to one of the things that Emmett was talking about before, we did trial a few years ago allowing people on after leaving Wellington, so the first stop after Wellington once it thinned out. But again, that came down with discretion, and we found that people were getting on at a stop where they had boarded yesterday, but there was a different train manager and a different loading the next day, and they weren't allowed on, and that led to conflicting situations. So I think it doesn't suit everyone, but we do need to be clear and consistent with the services that we allow people on, and there are some forward planning for some people who do have bikes that want to travel at those times.
And through you, Chair, there is a parallel here with the Accessibility Action Plan in that we talked about accessibility hubs and saying to our accessible passengers, actually, that's your best station, that's your best station, that's not a good station for you. I think we could provide some guidance to cyclists on, for example, if you need to get to Nainai, actually you're going to have to bike to Taita, travel on a train to Taita and bike back. And I think that journey planning is probably the best way to do it, because it's not just the Hutt Valley line, there's also similar things on Kapiti as well.
Okay, next got Councillor Free.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the luggage carriages which are currently available on the Wairarapa services. When we get the new Tohono trains, will we still be running extra, taking those luggage?
No, we're not going to be able to do that with the new trains, but there is separate luggage storage areas and separate bike areas. And one of the things that I know the team is currently looking into is how we can manage those two areas and perhaps increase bike capacity in the luggage area.
Yeah, because I do see, I think this does matter and thank you for what you're doing, because just looking at the transport plan, which is the next paper, I see it as a big aspiration that we continue to work to integrate cycle and active transport with what's provided with our buses and trains. So, it's at a high level, it does matter. Can a luggage carriage be added to other trains? It's similar to the Wairarapa train. I don't know much about this, sorry, probably asking silly questions, but...
Not feasibly. The reason it works on the Wairarapa carriage is because they're run by a diesel loco and not on the overhead. I don't think it's possible to attach.
I just had to ask, thank you for that answer. Wheelchairs, I just suddenly had a thought, like what happens if you've got your 3 bikes all loaded up on the train and then you get a couple of people in wheelchairs? How's that accommodated?
A separate area for the wheelchairs. Where that does become an issue is during off-peak services where we've allowed bike users to use the wheelchair space.
Right.
And in those occasions, the train staff do make it clear to the cyclists that if a wheelchair does board, they'll have to vacate the train and move to the next one, and they'll make that clear up front.
Okay. I think those were my main questions, but thank you also for the time you spent previous to this answering questions for me. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, Councillor Ponta and then Councillor Gaylor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just working out how to phrase this as a question. So
there you go, you just done the question.
Yeah.
There.
Are you aware that while there have been iterations to the approach that we currently have, effectively this is a policy that was set down in 2010. Now we're in 2026. If we don't look at this again and we play out for the same amount of time, we won't be addressing this issue again until 2042. I suppose I give that reference because my question, I suppose, is to us all, is whether we, because of the I suppose differences that we now see on the network in terms of people using bikes more often across the network, not just rail, because of what we see in other jurisdictions, whether we actually have got to a point where we really do need to bite down harder on this issue. And I wonder whether we need a set of recommendations to ask officers to actually come back with how we can improve the situation where we just don't have any restrictions on the timetable in terms of when bikes are carried. The physical restrictions of 3 or 4 bikes per 2-car set, or however many on the two-horner trains, they would still apply. But the situation of having some services that do and some services don't, the thing I think I'm concerned about is that actually affects the carriage throughout the day. So if you can't take your service from 9i in the morning, you're not going to be bringing a bike back in the afternoon. And so this is more than just the single services that actually can't carry bikes. This is actually a network problem. I have a question around I have the observation around the gauge. There shouldn't be much of an effect. Remember that the carriages that we have on the Wairarapa line are all English 1972 Mark IIe carriages. So they've been running up and back between London and Gatwick Airport before they came to New Zealand, and they are for a standard gauge. The train manager discretion has always bugged me. I wonder whether we can tighten up in that area. I don't think, what I hear is I don't think that the train managers actually enjoy having that discretion particularly, and I can see why they don't, and I have suffered that discretion myself with a bike and having been tossed off. So I do wonder whether we need to remove that gremlin from the system.
What was the specific question?
So what would it take, I suppose, what would it take officers, what would it take to actually provide a firmer degree of certainty for train managers that they didn't actually have to exercise a discretion?
I think from the train manager discretion perspective, you're right. The train managers do not like having that ambiguity, and they'd prefer a straight, this is what you're allowed to do. The reason for the discretion for those off-peak services is, and this was done in consultation with the train managers to get it over the line, there might be some off-peak services where they know that there's normally a couple of wheelchairs that come on later on. So rather than allowing those bikers to get on and then having to remove them afterwards, it was kind of, you're going to have to catch the next one because we know something's coming up. And it might not be wheelchair users. It might be there's an event day and they know there's going to be a rush of people in at Poiriva or something like that later on.
School bookings.
Yeah, school bookings or anything like that. So that's why we went with the train manager's discretion route. I think personally, if we did away with that discretion, it would go back to the max 3 per bike, 3 per 2-car unit, and that will be the reason we got it over the line is because we allowed it to be discretionary rather than every single service you'll be allowed 9 bikes on. But we'll have to do that in consultation with Transdev if we were going to change that.
Okay. I'm hearing, so I'm aware that Councillor James has prepared some suggested changes to the recommendations. I'll go through the other questions before I get to that, but they may provide more opportunity for discussion to flesh out your concerns a bit more. And I'm just don't want to drop them entirely, but at the same time, we've heard significant concerns from officers, and I don't want to discount those either. So I've got questions from Councillor Gaylor and a follow-up question from Councillor Free.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just wanting to ask about potentially charging for people using bikes. You know, if you book an airline ticket, you know, and you want to
upgrade your baggage capacity. You know, you can do that as a choice. Well, we've got some benchmarking information. What was your kind of conclusions or thoughts of direction around that potential opportunity?
Through you, Chair. In theory, it looked intriguing and delicious and super. I'd say yeah, it looked like all of those things, and then you just get into the mechanics of it here. First of all, we're very conscious of being in a position, I suppose, where we can't really start talking about integrated new electronic systems like a booking system without seeing what the final sort of configuration and shape of NTS is and what it sort of allows. So I think we're in a bit of a waiting period there to see. With booking, we thought it was going to potentially be resource intensive. It was going to require a heck of a lot of customer education. Procuring a system, of course, was expensive, and even if passengers are going to pay, would the procuring a system pay for itself? Don't think so. Also, there was the whole question about carriage cost. Now, the European models that we saw, you know, it was like 15 New Zealand dollars, you know, 7, 8, 10 euros for a daily carriage of a bike. That's what they charge. That's not something that would fly here. I think, you know, the pushback that we would get. So we would end up charging a nominal sort of fare. It would not cover any of the expenses. We would have a complicated system that would generate lots more complaints, guaranteed. And I don't know if it would provide, for the effort involved in it, I don't know if it would provide the level of sort of experience commensurate to the effort involved in putting it in, frankly.
Thank you for that. Councillor Free?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering if there's the opportunity for the chair or deputy chair, as a result of the paper, the decision or whatever we make, to give a bit more publicity to the actual opportunities that there are to take bikes. And I think, you know, for example, there are those wire wrapper lines. People might not be aware that that's likely to give more availability. But then that whole deal about if you're actually going in the opposite direction from the peak direction, even if it's peak time, you're likely to be able to use the train. I just think perhaps a little more clarity about, you know, there are possibilities, and just making sure people are aware of what's available, likely to be available.
Well, Councillor James is a bit of a social media star.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yes, I got 5,500 views on my last video about that, actually.
Great. Well, then I'll leave it in your capable hands. But but something perhaps official as well.
Yeah, no, take the message that that we could do better to promote the current policies that we have. So are there any further questions, or can I ask Councillor James to share some alternative recommendations that he has?
Other questions? Great. Thanks, everyone. You know, I put out a call to the general public about their thoughts and feelings, and actually their response was generally like, with the current capacity constraints and whatnot, and thinking about all the different potential for conflicts and everything, the current policy makes sense. So my thinking was, the other thing that people raised, which Councillor Saw also raised, was what about the future trains? So that's what my requests are there to address, to see if actually if our officers can come back and bring some options for potentially expanding our current bike areas, or, you know, not expanding the areas, but perhaps retrofitting with some kind of newfangled tech, perhaps, I don't know, to help expand that capacity, to help reduce those issues, and then secondly to also make sure that you know, us as a committee make that formal request that the bike capacity be considered for the two Hono trains, because as we've discussed, they will no longer have the luggage areas. And I think that's really important, considering that if you look to our final paper of the day and looking at the number of bikes on trains that have been recorded, since pre-COVID, the numbers have over doubled from around 2,500 to over 5,000. So, you know, it is a thing that is going to continue to be a thing, and we should try and accommodate people as we try and solve that first mile, last mile issue that we have with public transport. But yes, very happy if people want to make changes, amendments? I don't know if Councillor Duffy wants to jump in.
So I'll just ask Sam if she has any comments on the policies recommendations you put forward.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify in respect of the proposed recommendation 3 around the where the information is from in relation to the increase in the number of cycles.
What do you mean?
The increase in the number of cycles.
I got the data from the Public Transport Performance report, our last item of the day. If you look to, I am scrolling to the page now. It is in, that's right, it is in the actual report in the appendix. It is on page.
Admittedly, he does refer to himself as a transport nerd.
It's page 16 of the.
Yes, the
performance
beautiful
report,
graph.
which is, I don't have the.
Page 16, attachment 1 to report 26.135.
Yeah.
Excellent. Councillor Ponto, can you please turn your mic off? Councillor Duffy, do you want to make any changes, recommendations, or comments on that?
Thank you. I'd like to suggest an additional one between 3 and 4 to sort of complete the story, to something to the effect of, we note that in previous years train patronage has been lower and there may have been additional capacity for bikes, but that with increasing patronage now, that is at peak, that is difficult to accommodate. Something that just completes that the analysis. Okay. Notes that Tom.
Until recently, patronage has been in decline, but due to the current fuel,
Well, that it's just been dynamic and changing.
Sure, but it's now on the increase.
Patronage recently increased.
In peak.
In peak especially.
Councillor Free.
I wonder if we could add one that requests officers to investigate how we could make it more obvious where, which services are likely to have capacity for bikes, including peak services going in the counter peak direction, peak time services, but going in the counter peak direction. Because it, yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else want to throw in another recommendation?
Let's request that is more about current policies and current services where there may be capacity, bike cycle capacity.
Thank you, Democratic Services staff. Just want to check with Councillor Ponta. Does that meet what you're thinking? Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Where there may be.
I'd like to second that, please.
So that was moved by Councillor James and seconded by Councillor Duffy. It's a group project. Love to see it. So is there any further debate on this? Councillor Duffy? Oh, yeah, I mean, Councillor James and Councillor Duffy can speak to it if you would like.
Thank you. So I biked and trained this morning because it was very apt, and it took me 45 minutes to get from home to here in the office biking to Western Hutt Station, training to Wellington, and biking across town. One of my neighbours also came from next door to Greater Wellington office, and they took longer using park and ride at a train station. So just a little anecdote to illustrate that for many public transport users, the combination of bikes and public transport, be it train or bus or ferry, is very valuable. It's efficient, it's cost effective, and in the words of one of my fellow bike and train commuters this morning who had come from Tirohanga, she said that she found it very enabling, which was a good word. And it also wraps into our multimodal objectives in our RLTP and RPTP. So it's good that we, as a network, are able to offer as much bike carriage capacity as we can. When I first prompted some analysis of this a year or so ago, or earlier even, but around Riverlink, I guess what I was looking for is a very specific analysis of which services actually were so empty that there was no justification for an exclusion of bikes, which peak services. And I'm pretty sure that there were a few of those back then, but it seems pretty obvious that there's not so many of those now, and next month there'll be none, and then the following month we might be having the opposite problem. So I'm comfortable with these recommendations that this is the best level of support for the bike train combo that we can offer at this point in time, and love the collaborative additional work to just keep looking at what we can improve over time. So I just wanted to add those comments. It is a really, really useful way for some people. It's not going to suit everybody, but for some people it can be the cheapest, the quickest, and the most direct way to move around. So thank you, Evra.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Duffy. Councillor Frew?
Yeah, thank you. This has obviously been cycling and active modes have been something I've worked on for over a decade, and I've also been, like Councillor Duthie said, I've also been convinced by officer advice that we can't do a lot more than we're currently doing. But I think that the amendments that have been put up there are useful and provide some extra steer on the way forward. But I particularly want to talk about the opportunity that we have for Wellington City residents to realise that they are not as restricted as others, and given that we all contribute to the trains, and I've made that point, and sometimes Wellington residents don't get to use trains, but this is actually an opportunity in which they can get out into the rest of the region with their bikes, and there are many, many people who love to do that, and take advantage of that network, which they so often don't actually use any other time. So you know, the investment that's been put into recreational cycling and commuter cycling around our whole region is a jewel in Wellington's crown, and it should be a real opportunity for us to have recreation but also tourism opportunities. So I think anything that we can do to say, hey, Metlink services are here to be part of that story. You can, if you're a visitor to Wellington, get your bike on a train. It probably won't be a problem. Get out to the region, have an explore, and come back. And that is unlikely to be constrained. So part of the reason I put up number 7 is I think there's a story there, a really good story, and we can tell it, and we can be part of that story.
Lovely. Councillor Tupou?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to echo what colleagues have mentioned, particularly Sarah. You know, having come from a TA, we're part of our climate resilience strategy was public transport. And there was a focus several years ago on the multimodal enabling our community. You know, you may get tamariki who wouldn't mind biking into town if they go to one of the local colleges or even university. But being able to train back or commute back, being able to hop on at different points, I think, is the way of the future. And all of the work along Tupahoronuku, etc., speaks to that it's not one boot fits all. And that's speaking as an ex-cyclist, but or reformed, whatever you want to call it. But being encouraged to get back into things, Madam Chair, is that I think, you know, it makes sense. We're on the right track, and I think that this is just the way that things will be. Kia ora.
Thank you for that. Any further comments? No? Well, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Carried. Excellent. Okay, I am just going to move straight into the next item, which is the delivery of Wellington Regional Public Transport Plan. Who is talking to this one? Just Sam.
Kia ora, councillors. This report is a report that we provide periodically just with an update on delivery of the RPTP. It is, of course, we've got the refreshed RPTP. The report is in a slightly different format from how we used to do it, so really keen for any feedback you might have about the information in it. It touches on the key aspects that are in the Regional Public Transport Plan, and the attachment to it kind of indicates progress, I suppose. I just wanted to draw your attention to in the status column, some of the things are grey. That doesn't mean that there will never be any work being done on those things, but it means that the work is yet to commence. So it's a full list of all the activities in the RPTP and what's currently underway. So you'll see that there are some longer term aspects which don't have a green or a red or an amber. But we will be factoring those into our work program through the LTP. So
who would like to ask Sam questions on that? Councillor Duthie and then Councillor Free.
Thank you. Naturally, I went to the Hutt Valley actions. There's the mention of Tranche 2 network optimisation, and then there's a mention of 2026 Hutt City review. Are they the same thing, or did they mean different things?
Yes and no. Tranche 2 optimisation might incorporate some elements of the Hutt City runtime review.
Just explain what the runtime
review is. Runtime review is looking at the existing timetables. Where have we got things that have changed in the network? Plenty in the Hutt Valley to work with at the moment. That might result in a need for a timetable change to, say, allow more time to travel between stop A and stop B. And whether that then means, from a network optimisation point of view, whether we're talking about a more substantive change to a service.
So at the time of the RPTP, we were anticipating a review of the wider Hutt City network in 2026.
And that work is happening,
yeah.
But at the same time we have the procurement Tranche 2 opportunity to bring about some change through that mechanism.
Okay. I don't fully understand the distinctions, but as long as it's happening, I don't mind.
Both are happening.
Thank you.
Perhaps I could ask Tamsin just maybe to send out a memo, just explaining that in a little bit, because I was a little bit confused as well. Though I do appreciate that with Porirua, we implemented those changes through Tranche 1, so I assume you're talking about a similar thing that would give an opportunity to bring forward some changes through the procurement process.
There's a briefing for you on the 2nd of June.
Excellent. Can you wait a month?
Yes, I can. I guess from a constituent's perspective, the interest point is, when do we get to feed in? What's our point of engagement for that? So as long as that's covered in that and that will occur, then that's good. Thank you.
Councillor Free.
Just a query on implementing the changes already proposed for Awhiro Bay. I think I've mentioned a few times that we heard very clearly at the time of the election that many people in Awhiro Bay want to see a more connected service. I'm just wondering what is already proposed, whether that has been,
and also the timeline to actually do that, because that was promised some time ago and it's still yet to be delivered.
Through you, Madam Chair, some of the changes have been made. In terms of a more substantive timetable change, no, that hasn't been made. I will come back to you with a time on that one. I don't have it to hand at the moment.
To my knowledge, it was more about services actually connecting back to the city rather than timetable changes. Yeah.
All right, timetable change would be the mechanism by which we would do it, but I understand the issue from the community's point of view. Yes.
Okay.
Councillor, well,
I've got another
you've got
couple,
another,
if that's okay. So you'll get back to me on that, thank you. The other thing is investigate the need for further access improvements at Wellington Railway Station, but there's actually a list of stations, including Johnsonville. You know, if you're just looking at the Wellington ones, is it just Wellington at this stage, even though there's a longer list? Just noting that Johnsonville's there. It's the sorry, it's in the table. Page. It's not really.
Is it the one at the bottom of page 47, Councillor?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
that connects to the conversation we were having in the earlier report around BRT in terms of the programme of work around accessibility at our stations. So that's the high level item in the RPTP, and what we're working on is the implementation of that.
I guess I'm asking, has Johnsonville dropped off the list?
Johnsonville is on the list,
but it's not identified in the main header. In the first column, it just says investigating further access improvements at Wellington Railway Station, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then,
Johnsonville.
sorry, in the comment, stations including Wellington, Upper Hutt, Trentham, Paraparaumu, Plympton, Johnsonville, Niall, Masterton, and so on. So
Johnsonville,
it is included in
okay.
terms of accessibility.
Okay, and then just going back to Johnsonville, there's progress improvements to the transport hub in Johnsonville, which is mentioning stop D. Is there any work happening to look at a much upgraded transport hub at Johnsonville? Because what's there at the minute isn't particularly adequate given the weather up at Johnsonville and the numbers of people catching buses.
Sorry, through you, Chair. Yes, it is going glacial pace. So,
yeah.
You know, it does depend a lot on strata, my understanding is.
Righto,
So
yeah,
stride
stride.
the development. So we had a plan a few years back that we were engaging with Wellington City Council, and that's then fallen to the vagaries of trying to negotiate with the property developers. So there is a plan, but it is going at glacial pace, and it will, again, financially be something that we would need to potentially look at as well.
Can I ask then if the only thing is stop D, what's the time frame for actually getting that stop? I see that it's progressing, but what would be the time frame for actually getting something built?
We've just signed off the design, so I can give you those dates. I don't have them in my head, but it is progressing, and we do have the design, and that design has been checked for accessibility.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I look forward to hearing a bit more about that.
Councillor Gaylor?
Thank you. I don't know if it's within this sort of opportunity here or wider, but when will we next be having a look at the bus routes for the Kapiti Coast, in particular, for example, mindful of the population growth in Waikai with another very large retirement village of Somerset going in, and it's off a road on Park Road where there used to be a service, now there's no longer a service because at that point there wasn't the need, and having attended them last year, and that's absolutely huge now. So when would that be fitting in?
In terms of the tranche program for the procurement, Kapiti services are in tranche 3, and obviously we're just starting tranche 2, so it will follow from that. But just to reassure councillors, we are in contact with the TAs around future growth areas, and particularly with Kapiti, but also Northern Growth Area and Porirua. So remaining aware of where those developments are likely to occur and what that would mean from a PT demand point of view. And at the wider regional level, it sits under the regional strategy process around regional land transport planning and the future network that's coming through that mechanism.
I guess just similar to Councillor Duthie's question about the Hutt network review, when are we planning on doing a Kapiti network review?
I'll include that in the briefing in June.
You'll all just have to wait till June. Any other questions? Councillor Duffy?
I could wait till June, but eagle-eyed constituents, especially those dedicated people in Eastbourne, will note the little comment that some of their 81 services, which is the peak targeted express bus effectively from Eastbourne to Wellington, being considered to redirect to Wainuiomata. So they might get a fright when they board the bus in Eastbourne and then find themselves dropped in Queen Street, Wainuiomata. Just wondering what that means, because that would be, I presume that means using some 81 services to go Wainuiomata to Wellington, which would seem to be counter to Metlink's advice that we should be using the bus-train combination. Yeah. So what does that actually mean, please? Are we changing our tune on the direct bus to Wellington, or is that meaning something else?
I don't have the same grasp on the level of detail that you do, Councillor, so I can't answer that
Including your memo.
Specifically.
Thank you.
But yes, it will be in the briefing in June, and the RPTP signalled investigation into those services for Wainuiomata. It may be that there is an opportunity to do it efficiently through the bus service if we adapt the existing services rather than introduce a whole new service.
Okay, we'll wait and see what it means when it's considered. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question, which is in relation to the grey boxes. So lots of the actions, particularly the grey ones, are titled not in continuous program and are suggested that we may not do anything in relation to pursuing this action in this term. I guess what has changed since the adoption of the plan? Like, why was the decision made to put them in the plan if there was no realistic view to actually take action on them? And, you know, what can we do in relation to those actions that are not in the continuous plan, rather than just say unlikely to progress?
So through you, Chair, my understanding is this plan's been reasonably recently adopted. It's not in the continuous program funded in the NLTP triennium. So our proposal would be to scope it up to see whether it can be funded in the next NLTP round. So as part of our LTP process, we'd look at putting those things, seeing whether we can get funding to progress those things.
So and it's sort of chicken and egg, isn't it? You need it in that in order to get the funding. But that does create this weird situation where we have a lot of actions that we've put in there that we possibly aren't going to do anything in relation to if we can't get funding, which is not great from a communication with the public perspective, but it is what it is. Any further questions on this? No. Well, that item was just for noting, so there are no motions to move. So we'll move on to the next paper, which is the major projects. Sam, so this is just it is a bit of a once over lightly of quite a few of the things that we have on the go, but I guess it's an opportunity to ask questions and if you request further information on any particular aspect, we can bring that back to you.
Thank you, and yes, councillors, much like the previous report, as the chair just mentioned, this is a summary of where many of our major projects are at. This is a new report. We haven't delivered a report like this before, so again, if there's any content in there that you'd like to see expressed differently, we're happy to look at that. And yeah, it provides an update. Many of the things that are referenced in that report you have been across in terms of workshop presentations or other information. So in some ways it's a matter of recording progress for the public record, as well as to give you an opportunity to ask any specific questions you might have.
So what specific questions do people have? Councillor Saw.
Thank you. I really appreciate this new report. It's a really nice way of consolidating everything, and I don't know about everyone else, but it's a nice prompt and reminder of some of the big things we've got going on and all the decisions we're making. So it's nice to see it sort of digested like this. So long may it continue. I've got a couple of questions. One is around paragraph 64 and rail network and around Kiwi Rail's replanning exercise. And we may have touched on this in the first item with our laundry list of things we need to raise with KiwiRail. Can I just understand a little bit more about what the replanning exercise is, as in, even if it's slowed down things, is it for a better outcome for us, is one. And then the second part is, if we have concerns around the delays that it's causing, where are the avenues that we are pursuing to raise our concerns, and what are some of the consequences of the slowing down?
Good question, through you, Chair. So KiwiRail's undertaken a internal restructure, which is a reasonably significant one to our understanding, is to raise the profile of Metro within KiwiRail. They have been given a significant amount of money by the Crown to address backlog. In doing their restructure, they have determined that they don't have the resourcing currently internally to undertake the works that they had planned to do with that money. That is the replanning exercise that we refer to. As a result, they have deprioritised some works until they can then resource them with respect to both planning and execution. We have raised our concerns with respect to this and have asked a number of questions at the various governance meetings that we have in terms of what is the risk of deprioritisation, how have they determined what is deprioritised, and where is the Go to Green plan, given that the money that they have been allocated for that backlog is due to expire or needs to be spent by the end of June. That is what we've done so far. We are still awaiting more detail from them, which I presume they will also have to provide to the Ministry of Transport and Waka Kotahi, given that they are the overseers of the funding.
Do we have any influence or ability to assist in an extension to that date? Like, how set in stone is that date of using those allocated funds?
KiwiRail will have to do that potentially through the ARNIP process, and also directly with the Crown. We can and have had a significant amount of influence over the business case that we inputted greatly to obtain the funding. However, there is an issue with them having got what they asked for in terms of their then ability to execute and still maintain the existing levels of maintenance on the network. It's a known problem, and KiwiRail is going to have to figure out how to resolve it. We will obviously lean in and assist where we can, as we are asked to do.
Do you have further questions, Councillor Saw?
Yeah, I guess this sort of kind of fits in the bus procurement contract universe, and we've done some amazing work in that. With the first tranche going out to tender, I was just curious to know what the audit and assurance mechanisms or practices that we have to ensure that the KPIs and the reporting we're getting from the operators is accurate. Like, what is the assurance process we have around the information and data that we give us? Because the information they provide us is really consequential to them fulfilling the contract, and for us to sufficiently make changes or ask for improvements or whatever. So how do we know that information is good? How do we test and check that? What do other PTAs do in that space? Is this something that all PTAs are across?
That sounds like a finance and audit question to me.
I think you might know what my...
So in terms of, Lisa can respond to the question in relation to how the new contracts have been designed and that kind of thing. And that's what this report covers off. Do you also have a question regarding how that works currently?
I guess for the sake of this report, just how it's going to look in the future, and then we can offline the one of how it's currently working.
Sure. Lisa, can you respond?
Yes, certainly through you, the Chair, we can address that in a future report in terms of the audit processes, but they are considerably more comprehensive in the new contracts than they are in the current ones. The current ones rely on our internal checks and balances, but the future ones are a lot more objective, shall we say, than that.
Yeah, I'm curious to know sort of where we might sit with our, other PTA cousins as well, because obviously they'd have to have their own audits and assurance processes around that reporting as well. So is it consistent across all PTAs, or does each PTA have their own bespoke way of doing it?
Yeah, then more and more consistency in terms of second generation contracts. We're all very much aligned with NZTA guidance now, which originated from the Auckland Transport second generation contract. So a lot more consistency. A wee bit more to go with the smaller PTAs, but the three larger ones are now pretty aligned.
Any further questions? Councillor Duffy, Councillor.
Also like to express my gratitude for this report. It's quite useful to get that overview of the major projects and also have an understanding of the complexity and the dynamic nature of them, and that they change because they're big. My question is specifically about the RTI 2.0. So we've had an issue with this software provider and we're working to resolve that. At the same time, we're also rolling out the hardware around it. Does that mean the new hardware is compatible with the old software in that interim period? And then once the new software is in, then it is more accurate what is displayed on the screen? Is that how that
Yep,
works?
that's correct. Yep. We'll use the existing system to feed the new hardware, and when we get the new software developed, then that will upgrade. So it's actually works quite nicely in terms of being able to, for customers to be able to have an improvement on the street. Even though the information piece of it, we still want to do some development of that. It's the visuals are improved with the new hardware.
And I remember some detail about currently there's a few minutes lag or something in the data, and then it's going to be much more accurate with RTI 2.0. Is that dependent on this new software working for us to bring that accuracy up? Is that how that works?
It's in the specifications for the system that we're looking for, so we'd be expecting the new system to deliver what we were looking for from the existing provider that we're trying to change.
So just something I picked up, which I was a bit confused about with our presentation the other day, actually. So just clause 77, and it's about the eastern bus route. It says the geographical area for the business case is just to the Miramar terminus, but I had thought that part of the rationale for the bendy buses was the Seatoon tunnel can't take double deckers. So I'm a bit, and then there was mention of Hobart Street yesterday in the presentation, which is on the Seatoon leg of the Route 2. So now I'm very confused as to whether this is just to Miramar, and if so, what would be the reason for that?
So the reason for only going as far as Miramar, Councillor, with those infrastructure improvements is that in terms of the volume of buses on that part of the corridor past Miramar, we don't have the same stacking problems that we do on the city side of the route in terms of the multiple buses at the stops, which are what are requiring us to do those infrastructure upgrades. So in terms of being able to bring the scope within budget, the Seatoon works when demand reaches a point in the future at which we do have those capacity issues, then those are the stops that will be upgraded in future.
So do we actually have capacity issues on the leg from Miramar's shops through to Darlington Road? Because it is including the leg up to Miramar, I would have thought. Anyway.
I'm not familiar enough with the streets, Councillor, to be able to answer that question, but I'm happy to have a look at the plan with you in terms of the upgrade works that are there. And while the scope around the corridor is out to Miramar, we have also looked at the access requirements for the depots in terms of Cody Street and the Kilburney depot. So
it might be where the Hobart Street came in.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe Councillor James, Councillor Free and I should sit down with Tamsin ahead of going out to public consultation, just to make sure that we are fully across with a map, to understand that we're fully across which streets we're talking about.
Because there has been a lot of talk about the 2 tunnels, as people will probably be expecting Citroën to be part of it.
Further questions? So I have one in relation to Te Wai Tokamore o Te Awa Kairangi. We talk about, about Hutt Valley boardings in relation to the disruption, but can we split out the Western Hutt data? Because I guess I want to have assurance that running the train from Western Hutt is still a viable thing to continue doing for the next few years.
Through you, Chair, yes, and we have got information about Western Hutt boardings, and they have increased. And I can find you
Is there a conflict of interest around the table? If you could just send that information out post this meeting, that would be really cool to see the Western Hutt boardings.
So just as a soundbite, there's about 175 passengers a day boarding at Western Hutt, up about 50 from December last year.
And I understand that there are implications for Petone as well, from running the trains from Western Hutt through to Wellington Station. I need to understand what those are, but it sounds like it's all good. But yeah, potentially if we could have that data split out, it would be useful. Any further questions? No? Well, I just once again pass on the team's appreciation for this report, and we might have to make it a semi-regular thing, just so we don't lose sight of where the projects are at. So I take it this was just for noting as well. Sorry, Councillor Saw.
Sorry, I forgot my other question. I was around the accessibility action plan and some of the progress. Again, sort of on the same theme as my previous question. I know that we're about to roll out that training for operators and drivers. How are we monitoring the success of that? What are some of the outcomes we're hoping for? And again, I'm wondering where in the accessibility action plan do we have an action where we need to sort of socialise some of our aspirations and some of the actions to key stakeholders, particularly like operators and the workforce and other groups? I know I've sort of vaguely heard that it goes through operators, but it would just be really good to have that surfaced quite clearly, particularly as we've got the new contracts coming as well. So where is that, and how are we monitoring the effectiveness of that training?
So through you, Madam Chair, the operator training is actually in development because we've done it from scratch. So we are about to go into a stage of working directly with operators about the actual delivery and then how that translates into the behaviours that we expect to see. So the work isn't finalised, so the rollout across all operators won't be till next year.
I guess second to that is that in the development of the new contracts, we've had a tripartite approach. Yep. So how, and I'm aware that, this is still under the old contracts, how could we, I guess, in practice have a bit more of a tripartite approach to that development of that training program? Does that make sense?
The training program will be developed by the time the new contracts come into effect, and it will be a condition of the operator. In terms of your question about how will we measure the success around that, the original driver for the training, sorry, bad transport pun, was around the fact that most people reported accessibility issues were in terms of the face-to-face interaction with their travel. We would look to measure that again and hope to see that that's come down really significantly.
Is that every question out there? Cool. Okay, we will now move on to our favourite bit of the meeting, which is the Public Transport Performance Report. Just before we get underway with this, I wondered if the team wanted to because it is in the report, I wondered if the team, Tim maybe, wanted to provide an update on the fuel crisis situation specifically.
Thank you, through the chair. A quick one. I literally just came off the phone from NZTA. That's why I was sort of dashing out of the council chambers. It's a complex situation at the moment. A big thank you, particularly to Lisa's team, for pulling together a lot of last-minute figures. While the diesel price is moving around, it is going to have a quite considerably significant impact in the short term. At a high level, I think we've got two work streams within Metlink at the moment. The first work stream is what do we do if we need to rationalise or limit our diesel consumption, and as you'll be aware, that's mostly an issue for our buses. We do have trains that run on fuel as well, particularly the long distance Wairarapa services. And we have a piece of contingency work which is nearing completion, which is giving us options for what we might do if we've been asked to rationalise our fuel and what the impact is likely to be on our customers, and we can potentially share that work in the coming days. The second piece is understanding the financial impact that the current diesel price will have on our service contracts, both train, bus and ferry. The cost at the moment will be in the millions, and we are looking approximately at about $1.2 million per month that the diesel price remains around. Is it $3.80?
So that reflects $3.80.
$3.80.
For 1.5. So that's the worst case scenario.
So the worst case scenario at the moment is $3.80 is 1.2 million. So in the vicinity of about $1 million per month is what we're currently considering. We've been in close contact with NZTA and the Ministry. The Minister has received the additional costs that we see associated with the current fuel crisis. We're indicating that we had forecast capacity cuts, which were discussed at this council meeting today, and that those no longer seem relevant given the current context and the rising patronage. So we have asked for funding associated with reversing those capacity cuts as well as the diesel costs itself. We are currently waiting for a response. We are told that the Ministry is currently considering responses from across New Zealand, and they have all the information they require. So hopefully we'll see something in the next week or so.
I guess I just wanted to reassure the committee as well that as the chair of the Public Transport Committee, I'm concerned that we're kind of in a bit of a state of limbo at the moment in relation to our fuel costs. We've requested more support from the government, but we have yet to hear anything. Meanwhile, every day that goes by, we continue adding to our financial problems. And so I'm concerned that we should be taking more proactive action. So I have asked the team, particularly in relation to that second work stream that Tim has identified, if they could give us a briefing on the financial situation, both where we are for this financial year, but also further out to get a handle on our NZTA funding caps and things like that, which will also be impacted. So just reassuring everyone that this is something that's top of mind for me, and as soon as I get that information, we'll make a plan. And we may need to consider options back at this committee for increased fares or reduced services as a result of the fuel crisis if the government doesn't come to the party in terms of supporting our request for increased support. But Councillor Tupou.
Just a question, whether this is for you as chair or an officer, is so people in the community are probably thinking that the fuel prices have come down, but just from catching up on correspondence this morning from the Minister, is it likely to rise in the foreseeable future due to the uncertainty and that we, as you say, Madam Chair, need to be sort of 10 steps ahead?
I guess if I knew what the fuel prices were going to do, I would start investing in fuel futures and probably wouldn't be here anymore. So I can't say what the future will bring, but I guess there was hope that the current situation might be short-lived. That's feeling less hopeful. I don't know, Councillor Elder had particular views on how long the current situation was going to last, and I don't know whether you have any further views that you wanted to throw into the mix. No, no. Yeah, there's uncertainty, but it looks like it's not going to be a short-term thing. I don't know whether any of the officers want to. Do you have any inside knowledge, Tim?
Actually, there was well, all I can add to that, it's very it's very subjective, but the letter that we received from NZTA through NIGE has indicated that the cost is expected to remain relatively high in the short term. That's the information we've received, but where that information comes from, I couldn't tell you.
Okay, so that's a bit sobering, but yeah, this is the top priority for me in relation to transport concerns at the moment. So we definitely will be back on this subject. But in the meantime, another really interesting report. Paul, do you want to take us through some of the highlights?
Yeah, Tim sort of stole some of the thunder around fuel, but the one piece that we got yesterday from NZTA is that they've provided an option for PTAs where we can choose to apply indexation rates monthly versus quarterly. So we currently do it quarterly, and we're just underway assessing that option now. I wanted to give you an update on visas as well. So we've, I think, both Transit and Kinetic have done really well. They've got through, so now we've got 71 drivers who have been granted either an extension or or residency, which is good. We've only got 11 more to go for this year, and that goes between May and September. So they've done a really good job there. The next piece is obviously what happens in 2 years' time. Just to sort of work on that. But yeah, really good job to support their people, to help them, assist them to get either the extension or residency. So we've had 10 drivers overall leave and return home. Good question. Up till now, so those that decided not to extend have left, gone home. But we're not seeing any issues with recruiting locally. The operators are saying to us that recruitment is strong.
Thank you for that introduction. Questions, Councillor James and then Councillor Duffy.
If I could just dig into that a bit more, thank you. You said 71 either extended or have gotten visa, is that right? What's the split between the extension?
I realised I didn't have that information, that's why I gave you a full number.
Okay, yeah. All right.
But I can get that for you.
Sure. Yeah, I did just want to.
I actually think the resident number is very small.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. So is that the 10 have left recently? Is that why we've seen a bit of a drop in the driver numbers? So we're down 14 from last month.
Yes, I did notice that as well. I mean, I think, if you look across the time period, it's probably within range, but it might be part of that 10.
So I don't think we've seen too many disruptions due to lack of drivers yet, but if the trend continues, at what sort of level will we begin to see a bit of disruption across the network?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the exact numbers that we would start seeing the impact of it. I mean, I think each depot is a little different, it might be 3 drivers might start impacting, a depot like Upper Hutt, for example.
Okay.
Just on that, we've talked previously about identifying some lead indicators that would give us a handle on bus driver shortages before it was actually a problem. So have you started doing some work around that and tried to identify what those lead indicators might be so that we're not surprised by a bus driver shortage?
No, I haven't.
I was going to ask more. You go, Sam.
I just was going to say, through you, Chair, that we've obviously got the information, and I don't have the number in my head about what the shortage was last time it caused a problem, but my recollection is it was about 10% of the workforce. So we're really, so 70 drivers rather than out of the 700. So we're miles away from being in that territory at the moment. The other thing I just note about the information in the report about driver numbers, driver numbers are always fluctuating on a day-to-day basis. So, as people resign and come in and out. So, we keep it on the trend. Yeah.
Another question?
Oh, I just wanted to flag just fellow councillors just on the migrant drivers issue. I know we've already, as a council, advocated a couple of times to the minister, but I just think on this issue, just to avoid another mass cancellation thing and, support these people who have been here for years and been serving our community, I think the council should continue to advocate to Minister Stanford.
Thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Duthie and Councillor Saw.
Thank you. A few observations and a couple of questions. Some really positive trends in this report. So I was pleased to see the early running, where buses leaving intermediate stops early, was decreasing. So thank you for your efforts there, and looking forward to seeing that trend continue. Positive seeing patronage increase, trends on the Kapiti line, the Hutt Valley line, the Harbour Ferry, so on, naturally at this time, but it's good to see.
70,000 trips.
Yeah. The increase in bikes on trains was mentioned earlier. That's good to see too. And I noticed that the rolling average for all the patronage is now stable. So some of them were decreasing, and they're all now stable. So that's looking good. My two questions were around the bus driver numbers 1, 2. So that's the drop in 14 is the biggest drop we've had in this graph. So that might not be a problem if they all got recruited the following day. But if we have another 14 next month, and then another 14, suddenly we're in that dangerous territory. So that will be one we're wanting to see that offset next month, I hope. And then the other thing that jumped out to me was total mobility, with an anomalous jump on the column graph there for March. So do we know what's prompting that?
No. My only thought around it is, fuel costs the way they are. That's potentially why it's increased. I think it was 17%.
I put a ring around that as well. That was quite marked in this report. And I don't know whether fuel factors would be a concern, given that these are people that can't catch regular public transport. That's why they need total mobility. I did wonder, though, there's been a lot more talk about total mobility because we have been talking about it and the government has changed policies, and I wondered if that had prompted an uptake with people realising that they were eligible when previously they might not have. But anyway, I definitely need to keep an eye on that one.
But I presume the eligibility is quite a process to get accepted and get a card and all that. So we would know if
it may not have worked in the same timing. Yes, because you do have to go through that process before you can get your card. So
perhaps if it's something you could just have a look into and see if there is anything going on that we should be aware of or intervening around. Not that it's good or bad, it's just an interestingly anomaly.
So your questions, Councillor Saw.
Thank you. And just again, just supporting what my colleagues have said around some of the good indicators, but just picking up around the driver workforce issue of that drop off. I guess while we still may have a close to complete workforce, I just want to flag that we are coming into the winter illness period, and so having fewer drivers potentially means a much smaller buffer for when winter illnesses may hit the workforce. And I know that impacted the rail services quite badly in our last in the last triennium. So while we may be comfortable that we're not heading back into the cancellations we've had previously, I just want to flag that we may have that there could be a seasonal issue here, while we're also growing patronage as well. So is it possible for us to have some indication of whether our operators have enough buffer for that winter period, or the seasonal sickness period, bearing in mind that I guess we can't step in so far as to look at amount of sick leave taken and so forth?
Everything I'm getting from the operators is that they have good numbers, they're recruiting well, they're training well, and you've just got to remember that in the report the casuals aren't highlighted in there. So the operators are telling me that there's no issue with drivers or driver availability.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Saul? No. Anyone else? I have 3 questions. So whilst we still have a significant number of drivers on international drivers, those bus companies still have pastoral care obligations to those drivers, and we have heard from the City Mission about a number of immigrant bus drivers who were sleeping rough. Can you assure us that those pastoral care obligations are still being followed, and that those rough sleepers are being looked into, looked after, and there's some kind of someone is taking some steps to ensure that everything is okay in that space?
I've spoken to every operator about this, and especially since it got raised at the last Transport Committee meeting. All of them, there certainly was an issue which they dealt with. They found accommodation for people, and they got them housed. But since then, they've had no further issues with it.
That is really great to hear, and I hadn't been updated with that resolution, so that's really useful. I will pass that on to people that have been asking. I guess we just need to stay across that. My other 2 questions are in relation to rail punctuality, and it may have been that I was being a bit of a dunce in terms of reading my papers, but is there some difference between rail punctuality and punctuality of the rail network? Or is that the same measure? And if it's the same measure, you need to proof this a bit better because the figures are wrong.
That's a good question, because I picked up on that as well with Dave Mawson. So the 92% of rail network, I suppose that's all of that is driving. The level of TSRs that we have that are over KPI at the moment are driving the punctuality issues, but that's possibly measured a little differently in the rail network versus how we're measuring it.
Yeah, the 2 measures are different, and we'll have a look at the report to make sure that it's clear about what each of them covers.
I thought they were different, but I wasn't clear, and it would be good to understand exactly what they cover. So both the rail punctuality and the punctuality of the rail network point to the fact that there've been a large number of signal issues. Is there anything that sits behind that, or other than the fact that the network has been poorly maintained over a generation? Is there something more specific in the month of March that's happened that has caused those signal issues, or is it just random?
It's a hard question to answer, because the signal network is so patched over decades. So some of it can be purely down to weather. Weather gets into it. Theft on the network as well has also been quite an issue that we're also seeing. I think I've seen more this year, in the start of this year, than I have in the last year. So there's different factors that are feeding into that.
Again, I think that's something worth keeping an eye on, because obviously that has effects on our customers, and so if we need to do something differently in relation to protecting the assets, or signalling to KiwiRail that they need to do something different, we need to be ahead of that and keep an eye if things deteriorate further.
Sorry, through you, Chair, just with the rail network punctuality, there's a couple of nuances in that. So when you look at the graph, it talks about the KPI for KiwiRail. That is a different, the way that that is calculated excludes quite a number of really important things that customers experience. So for example, any TSR associated with the WOMP program of work is excluded from that KPI. So when you look at it, I think there's 4 parts of the graph. There is the KPI measure, which is an overall one, and then you look at the peak, which is the one that excludes all of those really important TSRs, and then you've got the 2 other ones that include, if you were to add back in those exclusions, you'll actually start to see quite a disparity between the actual KPI that we measure KiwiRail on vis-a-vis the performance that the customer experiences with respect to all those TSRs.
So that's what I picked up, that the performance of the punctuality of the rail network was sitting at around 95%, but the rail punctuality was sitting below 80%. So that's a significant difference.
It absolutely is, and it could have been my fault in the way I expressed it, probably punctuality of rail network and rail network punctuality, but it's a similar thing. Basically, it states that of all of the issues with the rail network, this is the punctuality data that we have, and within that punctuality data, you just need to be aware that what we are measuring KiwiRail on with respect to the WNA and remunerating them on is a different number to what customers are actually experiencing, and that delta is quite important.
It's really useful explanation. Thanks for that. Cool. Any other questions before we wrap up and have some kai? Yes, Councillor Ponta.
So, just looking at page 9.
Sorry, your mic did not.
Sorry, page 9 in the appendices. Attachment 1. So, the white and upper line is still tracking at 35% punctuality in March 2026. Trying to understand why that is when we completed investment on the line a year ago. Understand the last time I raised this question was because of blocks of line on the Hutt Valley section, but the Hutt Valley line is showing punctuality of 73.5%. So what is the reason for such a low punctuality?
There's a number of things. You're right, the other side, so the whited upper side TSRs aren't there, but on the Hutt Valley side, that's where the TSRs are. What we are seeing through the interpeak is there are 3 work sites where they're trying to get the level crossings completed, and that's what's causing the punctuality issues on those interpeaks, and then that tends to flow into the 5:30 p.m. departure out of Wellington.
Okay. So what percentage of their services are affected by that? So is that like 3 or 4, almost half the services a day?
Yes. Yep.
When will that come free? When will those works be completed?
Good question. I'll come back to you on that. I'm not sure when the program finishes for the level crossings.
Okay.
Do you know?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's just not good.
No, I mean, especially if it's a regular thing affecting that commuter train. We'll see if we can get some answers to when that will be resolved, and hopefully see those numbers come up, because they're not very good.
Just while we're here, because I do have Nathan here, just to update the committee on the heavy maintenance recovery plan, or what we know that's resulted from the
liquidation of Trogon, sub-supplier to Hyundai Rotem. As of last week, Hyundai Rotem and Transdev informed us that the original recovery plan is not achievable, and they will have to provide a delay, or there will be a delay in recovering all heavy maintenance for a number of units. There are two prime reasons for this. The information that Hyundai Rotem had when they initially took over the Tro-1 overhauls for these various components in terms of labour hours for individual overhauls was incorrect or not fully developed, and there was also a supply issue. So what this means is Hyundai Rotem have engaged another 2 people, or transferring 2 people from the EMU depot to their facility in Trentham to aid these overhauls. They're also recruiting another 2 people, and that should be done and completed by June, I believe, to try and alleviate these man-hour issues. And then the supply issue, they are trying to address from the supplier in the UK by expediting some supply, and it's a specific set of components for a specific element on the brakes, so they can't really go anywhere else. What this means in actual terms is we have 4 of the original 11 units now back into service, and it will therefore, carrying on, mean 11 units continuously be out of service while the maintenance is caught up. This is because the ones that they put back into service as they catch up the maintenance, the next one behind comes out of, hits its maintenance window, and then so it's a rolling section until about mid-June, when we start to see a decrease, and the decrease will be completed, or everything will be caught up by mid-November-ish. So that's what they're trying to address. I'd also like just to flag that the only other viable option that we had, other than engage Hyundai Rotem to do this work, would be to go back to the original equipment manufacturer, which is a company called Favely Wabtec, and they are present in New Zealand. However, they are now also engaging with discussions with Hyundai Rotem to do some sort of joint venture. Their facility in New Zealand is no longer financially viable for them to complete this work. So in terms of our way forward, in hindsight, we probably chose the best way forward.
But I guess the message from a customer perspective is that so far we are continuing to deliver the levels of service with regards to passenger capacity. Obviously, that would change if we got massive, increased massive numbers of patronage, but so far so good. And Paul is keeping a close eye on the numbers and ensuring that we can get the carriages we need. Councillor Ponto?
Yeah, just a question about all of the rail data that we have in these reports. Does this ever go to KiwiRail? Do they ever see the consequences of their actions or inactions in terms of how it's reading out to us?
We have between us, Transdev and KiwiRail, we have our own dashboard that has, that's the raw data. It's the, what customers are actually experiencing. So as Fee was talking about in terms of, what the contractual measures are, and we've had times where, we're all sitting there patting ourselves on the back until you actually look at what the customers is experiencing. So the conversations we have are around what can we do about these numbers, because that's the one we want to fix, not the one that we're patting ourselves on the back with.
Yeah. Well, the reason I think for raising it is KiwiRail will say we'll put a tick against 3 rail crossings at some point, but they're still suffering the Wairarapa commuters and the Hutt Valley commuters in the meantime, with totally oblivious to that in many occasions, I should imagine. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, any final questions? No. Well, we will finish this item, and I will say our closing karakia, which I understand we can put up on the screen. There we go. Okay. Kia tau te rangimari e, kia runga, kia raro, ki roto, ki waho, ai he te ahorangi, ki whakamaua kia tina.
Kina.
Hui e tai ki e. So Grant is in the back. He is leading our only workshop item after lunch. Do we want to? Can we get lunch done by 12:45?